To understand the cell, we must first answer the four most basic questions about the cell. What is a cell? Secondly, why does it have such a strange name? Thirdly, what are the criteria for a structure to be called a cell? And finally, why can't we see it with naked eyes? Let's answer these questions one by one. First, what is a cell? Cells are often called the building blocks of life. But what is the definition of a cell? The cell is the basic, structural, functional, biological, and the smallest unit of life and of all known living organisms that can replicate independently. This is an important point to make the difference between the living and the non-living, especially between a cell and a virus, which cannot replicate independently. A virus must first enter a cell, then uses the cell machinery to make copies of itself. Remember something: every cell has its origin from another cell. It may be produced from division like mitosis or meiosis, or if it is a bacteria, for example, it may be produced by binary fission. Even that cell was produced by another cell, and that one from another one, and so on and so forth, until we go almost 4 billion years ago, when the first cell appeared on Earth. But let's take a virus for example. A virus doesn't have its origin directly from another virus. It must first enter the cell, and then is the cell which makes thousands of photocopies of the virus, and then the cell is destroyed by the viruses. And they are spilled out ready to infect another cell, and the process repeats itself. So basically, viruses are produced by the cell itself. Secondly, why does it have such a strange name? In 1660s, Robert Hooke looked through a primitive microscope at a thinly cut piece of cork. He saw a series of walled boxes that reminded him of the tiny rooms or cellula occupied by monks. In reality, these tiny chambers were plant cells, since cork is made from the bark of the trees, even though he was not aware of this at that time. This is how the word cell was coined for the first time, and from that day we still keep on using it as a term in biology. So the name cell doesn't tell anything about the cell, since monk's cellula doesn't have anything to do with the cell, so its name has just historical value. And the third question was, what are the criteria for a structure to be called a cell? All the cells have three basic structures. First, thin cell membrane covering it. The second structure is the nucleic acid, or the genetic material, like DNA and RNA, which in our human cells is found inside the nucleus. That's why our cells are eukaryotic. Eu meaning real or proper, and karyo meaning kernel or nut. So they have a real or proper kernel or nucleus, surrounded by a double layer of membranes. And finally, we have the cytoplasm. Cyto meaning cell, and plasma meaning moldable substance or jelly substance, which happens to be the fourth state of matter. Cytoplasm is everything, absolutely everything inside the cell, between the cell membrane and the nucleus, which is filled with a gel-like material. And remember, the second structural criteria is the nucleic acid, not the nucleus, since there are some cells in our planet which are prokaryotic. Pro means before and karyo kernel, so it means cells before the nucleus or without a nucleus, like the bacteria for example, who do have a nucleic acid but don't have a nucleus. But don't worry, because I will be talking about cell classification and bacteria in other lessons. And finally, I would love to add another criteria, which is that a cell can replicate independently. It should not be in the list, since it is not a structural criteria, but I put it there outside the structural triangle just to emphasize it and to complete the mystic four combination. This is the simplest model of a human cell. We all draw the cell like this, but we will later see that cells are much more complicated than that. And the final question was, why can't we see it with naked eyes? Cells are so little, so they can maximize their ratio of surface area to volume. In more simple words, our cells need a big surface and a small volume in order to work well and more efficiently. Why is that? A big surface makes it easier for the nutrients to come inside the cell and for the waste products to be excreted out, which is essential for the cell to obtain energy and to maintain its structural and functional integrity. Meanwhile, a big volume means that there is more room inside the cell, so there is more need for energy. So if the cell needs big surface, why can't she grow bigger? It simply can't, because as the surface increases, the volume also increases exponentially, which means that also the energy needs of the cell increase dramatically, and there comes a point when the volume and the energy needs are increased so much that the increased surface cannot compensate anymore. Just like this donkey or this donkey over here. This disproportion leads to cell system failure and the subsequent destruction and death of the cell. Normal human cell size ranges from 10 to 100 micrometer, which is 1 million times smaller than a meter and 1,000 times smaller than a millimeter. If we take a sand grain with the size of a millimeter, we would have to divide it into 100 identical pieces to get the size of an average human cell. That's why we cannot see our cells with naked eyes, because they are microscopic and the only way to see them is through a microscope. Cells are just like us. They are just like tiny humans in miniature. They have tiny organs called organelles, which carry out different functions like our organs. Our cells can breathe, like we do. They can eat and digest nutrients. They can excrete waste products. They can move and communicate. They can also adapt to their environment and even get sick or injured. They also have a life cycle. They are born, use energy and grow, reproduce themselves, and finally, when their life cycle is over, they die. It's no wonder, since everything we do is thanks to them. Our body is made approximately of 38 trillions of cells, so we are not a single organism. We are basically a community of cells. So every time you feel lonely, abandoned, and every time you lose hope and faith in yourself, just remember one thing. You are not alone. You are a community of cells. Inside of you are trillions of super tiny and cool creatures working hard and sacrificing just to keep you alive. So be grateful to yourself by creating a warm, happy and healthy environment for them, which you can do by giving them the secret ingredient of life, which is love. So don't forget to love yourself. If you really like these videos, you can subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media.